The moment I saw Abigail Moore take credit for my work in front of the entire sales team, something cold and precise clicked into place inside me. She stood there confidently, outlining the proposal I'd meticulously crafted over weeks, presenting it as if it were her own strategic brainchild. The room was silent, but for polite nods and murmurs, none directed my way. I, Sterling Barnes, Senior Business Development Manager at Gen-Tech Solutions, had just been erased from my own project. 12 years of grinding experience, countless late nights refining client strategies, and now this public dismissal. Yet, outwardly, I kept my expression neutral, my voice calm when I later addressed her privately. That wasn't a team effort. That proposal was mine. She smiled thinly, dismissing me with a corporate platitude about shared responsibilities. But beneath that, the message was clear. My value was invisible, my contributions disposable. This moment wasn't an anomaly. It was the latest in a pattern that had been building since she arrived. I knew the numbers, the contracts, the clients better than anyone here. My proprietary CRM system, painstakingly developed over nearly a decade, contained the granular details that kept these deals alive. My 53 top clients alone generated about 40% of our annual revenue. Yet, here I was, sidelined and undermined. The stakes were higher than ever. The question was whether I'd continue to endure or find a way to turn this calculated slight into leverage. Gen-Tech Solutions operated under a veneer of professionalism, but beneath that, the company's loyalty was coded in bloodlines. The Moore family owned the majority stake, and with Abigail's abrupt promotion to VP of Sales just 3 months ago, the corporate landscape shifted overnight. I started here fresh out of college, a junior sales associate eager to prove myself. Over 12 years, I carved out my position through merit alone, building trust with clients, closing deals, and innovating proprietary tools. Without formal fanfare, I became the backbone for high-value accounts. But when Abigail arrived, propelled by family influence rather than experience, the atmosphere grew sterile and guarded. At first, we maintained a semblance of professionalism, quarterly targets discussed, collaboration on pipeline strategies. But subtle changes crept in. Meetings where I was purposefully left off the agenda. Budget requests stalled indefinitely. Public comments that questioned my methods in a way that felt personal rather than constructive. The company culture, once competitive meritocracy, warped into an environment where family loyalty trumped competence. I rationalized these slights, attributing them to adjustment pains in leadership during a tough quarter. Still, Abigail's offhand remark during a team briefing that I was easily replaceable was a calculated insult, a shot fired across the bow. It planted a seed of unease, but I buried it under a layer of professionalism. This was business, I told myself, nothing personal. The game had rules and I was still playing them by the book. My contributions to Gen-Tech went far beyond what the surface metrics showed. The proprietary CRM platform I had built since 2012 was the company's silent engine for client retention and contract negotiation. No one else had the documentation or access to replicate the nuanced client preferences and past negotiation strategies embedded in its code. This system generated an estimated $5.2 million in competitive advantage annually through bespoke pricing models and tailored client approaches. Beyond technology, I cultivated deep relationships with 53 high-value clients, 47 of whom I had engaged long before they joined Gen-Tech's roster. These bonds weren't transactional. They were built on trust and consistency. I also managed exclusive contract templates under a licensing agreement predating Abigail's tenure, giving me control over critical legal frameworks in deals. My communications with clients and contract histories were meticulously archived on encrypted drives I maintained, ensuring a secure, unassailable record of my work. Among internal allies, CFO David Larkin respected financial transparency, while legal counsel Karen Mitchell valued precision in contract details. Marcus Reynolds, my longtime colleague and client liaison, was a confidant who understood the strategic weight I carried. Collectively, these assets formed a fortress of value that I guarded quietly, aware that visibility could provoke challenges, but also that invisibility was no shield against erasure. The quarterly sales meeting was supposed to be my moment of validation. I had prepared a comprehensive proposal, for a $1.3 million software upgrade with one of our top clients, aligning technical specs with custom pricing models designed to close the deal. But before I could present, Abigail stepped up and delivered the pitch herself, framing it as her initiative, her team's success. Marcus Reynolds and 2 sales associates witnessed this misappropriation and later confirmed my authorship through corroborating email trails. When I confronted Abigail in private, she dismissed my claims as team effort and denied any intentional omission. I meticulously documented the incident, email chains, meeting recordings, witness statements, and escalated it to HR. Their response was predictable. They deferred to Abigail's executive discretion, effectively siding with nepotism over merit. I lost not only the public recognition, but also a $15,000 performance bonus tied to this project. Frustration simmered beneath my composed exterior, but I refrained from emotional confrontation. Instead, I focused on reinforcing my documentation protocols and expanding my understanding of legal frameworks. This humiliation was a data point, a piece of intelligence to be logged, analyzed, and stored for future strategic moves. The game had shifted, but so had my resolve. Abigail's reaction to my quiet resistance was predictable in its escalation. Within days, the sales team's structure shifted drastically under her directive, framed as a strategic redistribution of resources. The truth was far more calculated. 3 of my largest client accounts were reassigned to less experienced colleagues, a thinly veiled attempt to sever my direct ties and diminish my influence. The immediate fallout was measurable. Those clients expressed frustration, missed follow-ups, and even renegotiated terms that slid revenue downward by nearly $900,000. I monitored every dip, every email thread that revealed dissatisfaction, logging them meticulously. The whispers around the office grew louder. I was resistant to change, uncooperative with new leadership. These were precise, targeted smears designed not to confront me openly, but to erode confidence in my professionalism. Even Marcus, my closest ally, was suddenly uprooted, reassigned to a different region with little explanation. It was clear Abigail was isolating me, cutting the lines of defense before delivering a decisive blow. My work hours were scrutinized next, as if my presence needed constant validation. Abigail introduced a slew of bureaucratic hurdles, mandatory daily progress reports, unannounced audits of my email activity, and repeated requests for justification on even minor decisions. These were subtle but relentless. Every correspondence was dissected, every client call logged as potentially problematic. The atmosphere thickened with suspicion. Yet I maintained my composure, playing every encounter with cold professionalism. I documented each new restriction, each meeting where my input was dismissed, preserving an ironclad timeline of harassment under the guise of performance management. The office had transformed into a minefield where any misstep could be weaponized. I knew Abigail was assembling a dossier, her own pretext to justify my removal, a corporate firing squad cloaked in systemic formality. Despite the pressure, I refused to be baited into emotional reactions. Rationality was my shield, evidence my weapon. In conversations with HR and the CEO, I escalated my complaints, presenting a comprehensive file. Emails proving my authorship of key contracts, transcripts showing Abigail's misappropriation, client testimonials attesting to my contributions. I requested formal mediation, an opportunity to speak directly and clear the air. The responses, however, were disappointingly tepid. HR emphasized confidentiality and claimed business decisions are beyond their control, a clear euphemism for tacit acceptance of nepotistic influence. I learned that Abigail's father, the company's majority owner, explicitly backed every move she made, insulating her from any meaningful consequence. The compliance department conducted what amounted to a cursory review, dismissing my evidence as internal conflict. It was a stark realization. The internal governance was compromised, designed to protect legacy power rather than enforce fairness. Still, I persisted in meticulous record-keeping, knowing these documented facts might serve me when the formal channels inevitably failed. Despite the internal system's rot, I maintained my focus, refusing to let frustration erode my professionalism. Each interaction was logged, each slight catalogued with precision. I took extra care to preserve client communication records and continued delivering measurable results, even as my sphere contracted. The game had become asymmetrical. The rules were bending, and I was the anomaly they aimed to eliminate. Abigail's campaign had shifted from passive interference to active dismantling, yet I clung to the principle that control over information and behaviors, exercised with cold calculation, was my strongest defense. A crisis was unfolding within the corporation's core, one masked by layers of polite corporate language and procedural jargon. But I saw clearly, Abigail was setting the stage for a coup, and my role was to endure long enough to find a breach in her armor. The first tangible damage to my career arrived sharply. My promotion to sales director, which I had earned months prior and which carried a $40,000 annual raise, was frozen indefinitely without explanation. The timing was no accident. Concurrently, Abigail cancelled a critical contract renewal worth $250,000, one I had painstakingly negotiated, redirecting the account to a junior sales representative with inferior performance metrics. Watching this contract slip away felt like physical loss, a deliberate severance of my professional lifeline. My base salary remained static at $120,000 despite exceeding quarterly targets consistently. The financial impact extended beyond paychecks. I was forced to postpone a planned home renovation, a project symbolizing stability and future security for my family. Privately, colleagues expressed sympathy but distanced themselves, their caution palpable. Office whispers confirmed an unsettling pattern. Marcus had been approached by competing firms, courting Gentek's top talent, a likely ploy orchestrated to fracture client loyalty and destabilize my network. The evidence was circumstantial, but the pattern unmistakable. Abigail was not just undermining me, but sabotaging the company's foundational relationships. My resolve hardened. The corporate system was weaponized against merit, and I needed a new strategic approach. In a last-ditch effort to salvage some semblance of professional dialogue, I drafted a formal letter addressed to the Gentek Board of Directors. The dossier I assembled was exhaustive, documented instances of credit theft, contract manipulations, and the financial fallout exceeding $1.1 million. I requested an independent audit and demanded reinstatement of my promotion, seeking official recognition of wrongdoing, unmarred by nepotistic protection. A meeting was arranged with the CEO, a calculated opportunity to present facts calmly and directly, supported by legal counsel Karen Mitchell, who had reviewed the dossier thoroughly. My tone was measured, my delivery precise as I outlined the timeline and evidence, anticipating resistance but insisting on accountability. The response was vague, filled with corporate platitudes and deferred promises. No concrete action was offered. Instead, the issue was pushed into indefinite limbo. Within days, retaliation escalated. I was excluded from key projects, reassigned to non-critical roles, effectively sidelined without official termination, but with a message as clear as if it had been. The environment was hostile, designed to render me invisible and ineffective. The conclusion was undeniable. I had exhausted all formal avenues. The rules, the protocols, the internal governance meant to preserve fairness and meritocracy were broken or intentionally ignored. Abigail's cold rejection of my appeal underscored the depth of systemic protectionism. It was no longer a matter of negotiation or compromise. I was confronted with a stark reality. If I could not rely on the corporate framework to safeguard justice, I would need to operate outside it, leveraging my unique assets, client loyalty, proprietary data, and strategic insight to reclaim control. The stakes were personal and professional, the path forward uncertain but clear in intent. Survival depended on cold calculation, deliberate planning, and exploiting the vulnerabilities Abigail was blind to. The game had shifted irrevocably, and so had my approach. The next moves had to be surgical, precise, and uncompromising. The formal letter arrived on a grey Monday morning, its tone clinical, detached, a cold declaration that I was no longer the sales director, but demoted to account manager, with an immediate 20% salary reduction. The message was clear and brutal. My office space was revoked. I was reassigned to a cramped shared cubicle in the back corner of the floor. The walls felt closer, the air heavier. Gentek's HR, under Abigail's influence, circulated vague warnings about performance concerns. Without specifics, it was a calculated move to poison my reputation internally without offering grounds for defense. Whispered doubts began to circulate among colleagues, many retreating into silent compliance or polite distance. The transformation was stark. Once a respected leader, now an isolated figure moving through the office like a ghost. Despite the mounting pressure, my exterior remained composed. Each interaction measured, every conversation analyzed for subtext. Financially, this cut was significant. The salary loss forced immediate adjustments at home. Discussions with my wife about tightening budgets became routine, yet the personal strain was secondary to the professional calculus. I focused on facts, client feedback, sales metrics, internal communications. I quietly reached out to my most loyal clients, ensuring lines of communication stayed open, careful to avoid raising suspicion. Allies like Marcus offered discreet support, but the office climate had shifted toward fear and self-preservation. Every handshake was colder, every glance guarded. The isolation was strategic on Abigail's part, designed to erode my influence without a public confrontation. I catalogued every slight, every alteration in behavior, converting emotional adversity into data points for a future strategy. Late nights became the norm. I sifted through old emails, client histories and contract clauses, searching for leverage. The physical space I lost was replaced by digital fortresses of information I guarded obsessively. Each cubicle conversation I overheard, each hallway glance was noted, an intelligence-gathering mission in hostile territory. Even undercut, my mind refused to accept defeat. This was a tactical challenge, not a capitulation. The game had changed, but my approach remained surgical. I disentangled myself from the shrinking official sphere and reinforced clandestine channels with clients and trusted associates. While the external environment suffocated, internally I was calculating a counterstrike, methodically preparing for the inevitable escalation Abigail was orchestrating. Still, the emotional cost was undeniable. In quiet moments, self-doubt crept in, the nagging question of whether I'd misread the landscape or underestimated Abigail's reach. But I suppressed these doubts with cold logic. The years of documented achievements, client loyalty, and proprietary systems were not erased by demotion. If anything, this low point crystallized the stakes. It was a crucible, stripping away distractions and exposing the true battlefield. The professional isolation felt like a void, yet I refused to be swallowed. Instead, I stared into the abyss, recognizing that survival demanded endurance and precision. Abigail's campaign was a declaration of war. My response would be a calculated counteroffensive, grounded in facts, not emotion. Friday afternoon delivered the final blow, a termination letter signed by Abigail herself, citing company restructuring as the rationale. The timing was deliberate, a merciless end to a week of marginalization. The letter was succinct, devoid of explanation, beyond a brief note that my position was eliminated effective immediately. Almost simultaneously, the announcement came that Gentek had formed a new sales division, explicitly excluding me and reallocating my 53 clients to other representatives. The sting was sharp. Those relationships I'd built over a decade were severed with corporate coldness, but the financial betrayal cut deeper. My equity stake, once representing 12% of company shares, was effectively wiped out through a sudden revaluation clause invoked without prior notice. An $850,000 loss evaporated in an instant, a monetary wound layered with humiliation. Further investigation revealed Abigail's deeper duplicity. Internal whispers confirmed she had established a parallel business entity, siphoning off clients and proprietary intellectual property under the radar. The carefully woven web of deceit was not an impulsive act, but a meticulously premeditated conspiracy. The magnitude of the betrayal went beyond financial ruin. It was the dismantling of a professional legacy, painstakingly built. Sitting alone in the barren cubicle, the cold clarity settled. This was no longer a corporate power struggle, it was a strategic purge. Yet I did not crumble. Instead, my mind shifted into clinical analysis mode. This was a game board reset, and I was already recalculating my moves. The parameters were set, the rules were broken, but the game continued. My response would be devoid of sentiment, measured and relentless. The loss was personal but processed with detachment. I had to dissect every breach, every vulnerability on both sides. I began an exhaustive audit of my professional assets, the proprietary CRM database I designed, the client contracts with strict non-transferability clauses, and my email archives that proved authorship of key sales strategies. Each document became evidence, each timestamp a piece of the puzzle. I revisited my employment agreement with Karen Mitchell, where I'd identified clauses protecting exclusivity and bonus payments. Gentek's persistent violations had nullified the non-compete clauses, a critical discovery that shifted the legal balance. Abigail's weaknesses surfaced clearly: her lack of formal sales training, absence of authentic client relationships, and the embezzlement disguised within inflated marketing budgets. This was not a position of strength, but of exploitation. David Larkin, the CFO, became a quiet ally, confirming financial irregularities through discreet channels. I assembled a dossier detailing these inconsistencies, cross-referencing transactions and budget allocations that didn't align with reported figures. I also reached out to former colleagues, identifying those discontented or marginalized by Abigail's regime. The response was cautiously optimistic. 47 of my clients expressed willingness to sever ties with Gentek to remain under my guidance. This client loyalty was a critical asset, a potential lifeline. The emerging strategic map was clear, a dual approach combining legal action with a pivot toward a direct competitor. The plan was not yet fully formed, but the threads were weaving into a coherent strategy. Rationality replaced shock. I was awakening to the scale of the battle ahead. My emotional state evolved from stunned disbelief to a simmering resolve. The pain of betrayal sharpened into a weaponized anger. It was no longer about what was lost, but what could be reclaimed and dismantled. I refused to be a casualty. This was the moment where pain transmuted into power. The mantra "never again" echoed silently as I sifted through documents late into the night, each line reinforcing my determination. The betrayal was a catalyst, stripping away complacency and igniting a cold fury focused on strategic retribution. This awakening was not about revenge in the traditional sense, but about restoring balance through calculated precision. The cold anger birthed a relentless focus. I would use every resource, every fact, every relationship to dismantle the facade Abigail hid behind. I began to envision the contours of a methodical counter-offensive. The emotional clarity allowed me to separate personal grievance from strategic necessity. This was a chess game. Every move had to be deliberate. I revisited all documentation, ensuring no detail was overlooked. The legal pathways opened by contract breaches and financial misconduct formed the cornerstone of my approach. I recognized the necessity of external allies and began to identify potential partnerships beyond the immediate corporate sphere. All communication was encrypted, every step measured for risk exposure. The cold awakening was strategic empowerment. It was not about revenge, but restoration of control. Abigail had underestimated the depth of my resolve. The fractures she created were vulnerabilities I would exploit systematically. With renewed clarity, I secured all electronic and physical documentation relating to my work, encrypting backups stored securely with trusted family and allies. 5 former colleagues, including Marcus Reynolds, formalized statements corroborating my claims of misappropriation and misconduct. I moved swiftly to register copyrights for proprietary CRM algorithms and contract templates, establishing unassailable legal authorship, predating Gentek's claims. This step was critical. Solidifying intellectual property rights would form a pillar of any legal action. Confidential discussions with Stellar Tech, Gentek's largest competitor, were initiated quietly. Negotiations began around potential employment and client transfer agreements, laying groundwork for a strategic pivot. Parallel to this, engagement of a regulatory consultant focused on preparing complaints to the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding suspected embezzlement was underway. Contingency plans were drafted meticulously. A fallback consulting role was secured to ensure financial stability, while potential investor backing for an independent startup was explored, providing options beyond corporate entanglement. Every detail, contracts, financial records, testimonies, was methodically catalogued and cross-referenced, ensuring readiness for a multifaceted offensive. In a measured conversation with my wife, I articulated the gravity of the situation and my commitment to a strategic response rather than emotional reaction. Her support was unwavering, her perspective grounded me. This dialogue crystallized the shift from reactive to proactive. The cold calculation that had always guided my professional life now steered my personal resolve. The board was reset, and I was repositioning my pieces for a relentless, precise assault. I began the delicate process of mapping vulnerabilities with ruthless precision. My list of 53 clients wasn't just a roster. It was a dossier of dependencies, preferences, and unspoken loyalties. I reached out to each one, careful to maintain the guise of professional courtesy, signaling my intention to transition to Stellar Tech without alarming Gen-Tech's gatekeepers. Every call was scripted yet flexible, ensuring continuity, preserving personalized service, a seamless handoff. The responses were better than anticipated. 47 clients verbally committed to follow me, their trust forged over years of bespoke dealings. Their willingness was a strategic asset, a tangible foothold in the next phase. I documented every interaction meticulously, call times, exact language, client sentiment, building a digital ledger that could withstand legal scrutiny. Parallel to client outreach, negotiations with Stellar Tech's VP of Sales unfolded in controlled increments. I traded data on client portfolios and sales forecasts for firm assurances. A senior director role with a 25% salary increase, performance bonuses explicitly tied to client retention metrics, and non-compete clauses carefully reviewed and softened. The offer was more than a lifeline. It was validation of my professional worth outside Gen-Tech's toxic sphere. I ensured that all verbal commitments were followed by email confirmations, preserving a paper trail. Simultaneously, I commissioned legal counsel to draft cease and desist letters addressing potential claims from Gen-Tech on client solicitation and intellectual property. These documents remained dormant, but ready, a silent threat in my arsenal. Abigail, embroiled in internal politicking and blind to these rippling undercurrents, remained unaware of the web tightening around her. Throughout this phase, communication channels were encrypted, and I maintained plausible deniability. My tone in public remained cooperative and composed, avoiding any hint of defection. Internally, my network solidified, from loyal clients to discreet allies within and outside the industry. Each node was calibrated for maximum efficiency. Information was compartmentalized to prevent leaks. My legal and strategic advisors convened regularly, analyzing every potential countermeasure Abigail might deploy. This wasn't impulsive rebellion. It was surgical preparation. The alignment of client loyalty, legal readiness, and competitive positioning created a battlefield poised for decisive maneuvers. I wasn't just mapping vulnerabilities. I was engineering an inevitability. With every confirmation, every signed agreement, the architecture of my counteroffensive took shape, measured and unstoppable. Reviewing these developments late into the night, I found a rare moment to share the latest with Emily. Her calm pragmatism grounded me. "We're close," she said, voice steady. "Just keep the line clear. Timing is everything." Her support was crucial. Any sign of personal instability would be weaponized against me. I absorbed her advice, internalizing the need to mask the storm gathering beneath my composed exterior. The inventory of dependencies was more than a list. It was a map of leverage points, each client a potential domino. With every detail documented, every alliance secured, I was ready to transition from preparation to execution, the moment where planning met reality. Final reviews of contracts, client agreements, and communication logs became my daily regimen. I scrutinized every clause, seeking leverage and loopholes that could tilt the legal scale. The employment contract with Gen-Tech, the non-compete provisions, intellectual property rights, all were dissected with precision. I flagged ambiguous language and prepared counters for anticipated challenges. My meetings with Karen Mitchell were intense, focusing on refining legal strategies and tightening operational protocols. I ensured all communication was backed up, encrypted, and time-stamped. Every detail had to withstand forensic examination. In parallel, I met with Emily to confirm personal readiness and synchronize timing. Monday morning, we agreed quietly, the trigger for formal resignation and announcement. The date was fixed. The formal severance of ties would be swift and public. We discussed contingencies, media contacts prepped to handle inquiries, regulatory filings aligned with client notifications, and plans to shield our family from fallout. The calm in these moments belied the enormity of what was to come. I briefed David Larkin and Karen Mitchell, outlining execution protocols with exacting clarity. Each was a cog in a well-oiled machine, aware of responsibilities and boundaries. My demeanor remained unflappable, a mask of control that concealed the intense coordination beneath. The office facade was unbroken. No hint of upheaval disturbed daily interactions. I met colleagues with neutral professionalism, all the while aware that the stage was set for a strategic coup. No detail was left to chance. Backup systems were tested, legal filings double-checked, client communications queued for release. The calm before the storm was not a lull but a deliberate pause, a measured breath before the plunge. Every decision had been weighed, every risk accounted for. I was poised to shift the corporate balance irreversibly. Sunday evening brought an unexpected development. David Larkin, reviewing the financial audit I had initiated, uncovered irregularities that shifted the entire paradigm. Over $450,000 had been embezzled through fraudulent marketing contracts linked directly to Abigail Moore's personal bank accounts. The transactions were masked by inflated invoices, lacking proper documentation, violating multiple company policies and regulatory statutes. This discovery elevated the conflict beyond civil disputes into potential criminal territory. The implications were seismic. Abigail wasn't just undermining me professionally. She was engaging in financial malfeasance. David's voice was low but urgent during our call. "Sterling, this isn't just a breach of contract anymore. This could bring down the whole executive team if it goes public." The weight of those words crystallized new dimensions of my strategy. I immediately expanded the audit report to include these findings, ensuring all evidence was cross-verified and documented with forensic rigor. This gave me incontrovertible proof to present, not only internally, but to regulatory authorities and law enforcement. The board's stance would inevitably shift. Criminal investigation would overshadow corporate politicking. Abigail's internal defenses weakened overnight. Integrating this twist into my plan required recalibration. I coordinated with Karen to prepare formal complaints for the SEC and local authorities, ensuring that timelines and documentation were airtight. The scope of legal action broadened, now targeting embezzlement in addition to contract breaches. I sensed the growing urgency, but maintained outward composure. This revelation was a force multiplier, legitimizing my position and expanding leverage. It also communicated a silent message to allies and adversaries alike. The stakes had escalated. The game was no longer just about power or revenge. It was about systemic justice. The pieces aligned for a decisive strike. Monday morning commenced with precise execution. I submitted my formal resignation letter, citing fundamental breaches of contract as justification. The tone was clinical, devoid of bitterness, a professional severance designed to preempt counter-narratives. Simultaneously, my legal team filed formal complaints with the SEC and local law enforcement, attaching the financial audit that detailed Abigail's embezzlement. These filings triggered immediate regulatory scrutiny, sending shockwaves through Gentek's executive ranks. I activated a kill switch, embedded in the proprietary CRM platform I had architected and licensed under my name. Gentek's access was revoked remotely, effectively crippling their client management systems. This was a calculated move that disrupted their operations instantly. Client data became inaccessible, and sales representatives found their workflows paralyzed. It was a surgical strike, non-violent but devastating in impact. My clients received direct communication, assuring them of uninterrupted service continuity despite the upheaval. Their loyalty transitioned seamlessly to Stellatech, validating years of trust. Abigail's response was rapid but ineffective. Internal memoranda were issued denying all allegations, framing the accusations as baseless and threatening legal action against me. Her attempts at damage control faltered as regulatory investigations loomed. The board faced a crisis, balancing corporate reputation with emerging criminal liabilities. Throughout, I maintained an unassailable professional posture. refusing to engage in personal disputes. Instead, I let the documentation, legal actions, and technological controls execute the strategy. My role shifted to observer and director, orchestrating the collapse of her dominion with cold precision. The first consequences were delivered swiftly and irrevocably. Abigail was no longer just an adversary, she was a liability exposed in the harshest light. The boardroom felt colder than usual that morning, the sharp fluorescent lights above casting sterile shadows across the polished mahogany table. As I stepped up to the podium, the weight of every dossier, email chain, and audit report I'd compiled pressed down on me, but I kept my expression neutral, the calm of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times. Abigail sat across the table, her usual confident poise faltering, fingers twitching against the table's edge. The CEO gave me a curt nod, signaling my turn to address the assembled directors. I began methodically, presenting the timeline of contract violations with exact references to clauses she had breached. I detailed the client testimonies from Karen Mitchell and David Larkin, their statements corroborating the discrepancies I uncovered. When I pulled up the financial audit, the room's atmosphere shifted palpably. Numbers and bank transfers traced directly to Abigail's personal accounts, inflated invoices, and forged signatures displayed on the projector. "These aren't allegations," I said evenly, locking eyes across the room. "This is documented evidence of embezzlement, supported by client and staff statements." The room remained silent except for the low hum of the projector and the occasional rustle of papers. Abigail's attempts to deflect, accusing me of paranoia and personal vendettas, collapsed under the weight of irrefutable proof. When David and Karen took the floor to answer the board's pointed questions, their clarity and consistency left no room for doubt. The presence of media representatives, tipped off ahead of the meeting, was felt in the tense glances and the subtle clicking of cameras. When the vote was called to suspend Abigail pending investigation, the decision was unanimous and swift. The power balance had decisively shifted. No longer the marginalized manager, I commanded the room with undeniable authority. Client endorsements began to pour in online, amplifying the professional vindication without a trace of spectacle. This was precision justice, delivered without drama, but with absolute finality. The following days brought a cascade of consequences that unfolded with relentless momentum. Regulatory bodies imposed a $2.3 million fine on Gentech, citing failures in compliance and oversight amplified by Abigail's misconduct. Shareholders filed lawsuits aimed at recovering losses, and the company announced a mandatory financial restructuring to stabilize its shaken foundations. Abigail's resignation was tendered quietly at first, but her presence became untenable as criminal investigations took hold. Several executives, once complicit or negligent, were removed or resigned under pressure, further destabilizing the company's leadership. Industry publications dissected the scandal at length, contrasting the fallout with my steady professionalism, uniformly portraying me as the principled leader who restored order amidst chaos. Gentech's stock value plummeted by 35% over 2 months, a seismic financial shift that echoed through the market. From my vantage point at Stellatech, I observed the fallout with a clinical satisfaction, tracking the complex interplay of regulatory actions and shareholder movements. I was no longer a bystander. I was a principal actor in a broader narrative of accountability. The systemic mechanisms of justice had functioned effectively, not out of personal vendetta, but due to relentless adherence to procedural rigor and strategic patience. My focus was already on expanding my new role and client base, building on the foundation laid by this decisive confrontation. The outcome confirmed a fundamental truth: preparedness, documentation, and composure forge invincible weapons in the arena of corporate power. Abigail's attempts to regain control grew desperate and disjointed. She reached out through legal representatives, proposing settlements that included repayment of embezzled funds and retractions of her own accusations against me. These overtures were met with firm rejection from my legal team, confident in the overwhelming strength of our evidence. She initiated a defamation lawsuit, accusing me of sabotage, claims that dissolved swiftly under scrutiny as every prior communication and interaction was documented and time-stamped. In a final effort to undermine me, she leaked anonymous allegations to industry contacts, but these were disproved within days by thorough investigations. Regulatory agencies pressed formal charges, and the corporate board moved to bar her from future roles in the business sector, stripping Abigail of the influence she once wielded so arrogantly. The erosion of Abigail's network was palpable. Executives who once courted her favor distanced themselves as her legal and professional isolation deepened. Some former allies reached out to me privately, offering apologies that acknowledged their earlier complicity or silence. I listened, noted the changes without haste or emotional response. This was a strategic realignment, not personal reconciliation. My posture remained unwavering, focused entirely on forward momentum. The web Abigail had spun was unraveling thread by thread, leaving her increasingly vulnerable and exposed. My role transitioned from challenger to architect of a new order within the industry, grounded in competence and ethical rigor. The system I respected and invoked was dismantling her influence, ensuring her defeat was thorough and irreversible. 1 year later, my professional landscape had transformed entirely. As Senior Director of Business Development at Stellatech, my salary reflected the elevated responsibilities, a 30% increase to $156,000, with eligibility for a $50,000 annual bonus tied to performance metrics. My client portfolio expanded to 65 accounts, including 47 loyal former Gentech clients generating $7 million in annual revenue. The $1.5 million settlement secured from Gentech for wrongful termination and contract breaches was a tangible validation of my strategic navigation through the corporate labyrinth. I retained full copyright ownership of the CRM platform I developed, an asset that now formed the technological backbone of my new operations. Invitations to speak at major industry conferences followed, marking a professional recognition grounded in ethical rigor and competence. My personal life too flourished in the aftermath. Emily's steady partnership provided an unshakable foundation. Our conversations now centered on growth and stability rather than crisis management. While I reflected often on the systemic justice that prevailed, I avoided moralizing. This was a victory achieved through preparation meeting opportunity, a demonstration that cold calculation and strategic patience could dismantle entrenched power. Abigail Moore faced ongoing legal proceedings that would undoubtedly close the chapter on her corporate career. For me, the outcome was measurable, strategic, and complete. A hard-earned peace forged in the crucible of conflict, now serving as a platform for future endeavors, unburdened by past constraints.